The first thing we're looking at is a story I did called Camp Tamalpais. Tamalpais means sleeping maiden, and that was the name of our mountain in Mill Valley where I lived as a kid from ages 10 to 17. It's a story that contains very mean pictures of my mother and the girl and her mother and some of members of her family who lived down the street. I call my mother Igor. Her real name was Helen. I love this story because it's all about the evilness in a child's mind, and particularly sadistic little girls. I'm very proud of the little scenes of doll sadism and the sadism that little girls practice on each other, which I must say we learned from our mothers. I know there are some very good women cartoonists who do wonderful stories about their backgrounds, but in my case, my background from the very beginning was evil and twisted and fiendish, and this story still makes me laugh. I didn't have any formal education with my work. I always drew and painted what I wanted to. My mother tried to get me art lessons with a local artist. He told me to draw a still life. I said, I don't want to draw a still life. I'm not interested in doing apples and bottles. And he said, well, then get out. I did have an art teacher for a while until there was a conflagration. He wanted me to be the next Gustav Klimt. I just wanted to express myself. When I brought in my first comic strip to him, he said, get out. But at the end of the day, I got what I wanted, which was my personal freedom. I do not believe that anyone can be taught art. I believe that it's something that you do yourself. It is a personal language, which only you can develop. And once you've developed it enough, then other people can learn to speak it. It is not the job of the art teacher to erase your work. It is not the job of someone in an official capacity to tell you what your internal language is. Some things I did in school when I was still about 13. This was how I got back at people after they teased me all day, because I didn't know how to stand up for myself. So I've drawn Fran with very huge, ungainly hands because she was rather masculine and gawky looking, and I've emphasized her Adam's apple, which was very unkind of me. We've got a picture of a little girl who I called Ike Mo. I just remember that name floating around from somewhere. But it's how I saw myself as a child, rather unpleasant and hairy and out of control. My self-image and my art were always a part of each other. Sometimes I shaved my head. I think I was the first woman in San Francisco to shave her head. Men screamed when they saw me on the street. It was unusual. Most women artists only go as far as other people allow them to, taking an often ladylike position to their own humanity. I work to break out of the geisha-like shell into my own personhood, no matter how dark the facts may be. A sort of Persephone in my own underworld. Covers for my solo underground comic, Frescazizis, which is still illegal in Britain. I won't show you the most illegal parts of it. Oh, no, maybe I will. We'll see. Frescazizis was taken from when I worked in a TV news station, 4 guys and me in a tiny newsroom writing down the stories that came through during the day. One of them was about an Italian baker who had devised some obscene baked goods, and he'd put them in the window of his bakery on a Sunday, which was a huge shock to the Italian populace. The little sign saying Frescazizis, which means fresh cocks in Italian. The ladies on the cover, there's myself in the front, and my friend Molly, who was a dancer and had gone with Vaughan Baudet, a very famous cartoonist from our period. On the back cover is a picture of a very talented dipsomaniac named S. Clay Wilson, standing under the neon sign Prick's Cafe, which was actually Dick's Cafe, which was where we did most of our drinking. Next to him is sort of a take on Marlene Dietrich in Blonde Venus, where she dressed as an ape and then took off her ape costume to reveal this beautiful woman. This comic is still illegal in Britain. Maybe it was because it was done by a woman. In Debasement. I find this is a rather significant story. It's a pastiche of the well-known Story of O by Pauline Réaget, and it's rather relevant because we've got the newest sort of form of, I don't know what to call it, mummy porn done by the lady who did the book about quite a few shades of neutrals. This is a take of the first and more vigorous form of ladies in bondage, except this story is a twist. It's about men in bondage. There's a woman who's keeping a bunch of dangerous men in her basement, and I had a great deal of fun doing this story. And considering that the male underground cartoonists, who outnumbered us women by about 4-1, were outraged by this story, so that was a real coup for me, mainly because there's a rather incendiary scene towards the end of this story where there's a castration scene. The women went mad for it. The men were disturbed. Some of them didn't speak to me for quite a while. But I like the different characters. I like the fact that one of the men in bondage was a hairy biker and one of them was a sort of a pretty boy. And I just liked the projection of it being into a future where it's men who are endangered instead of women. Here we are at my favorite time of year with my favorite kind of celebration, Halloween. One of my favorite memories of a great party I gave where I invited all my cartoonist friends. I wallpapered the hallway with cheap butcher paper and put pens and pencils all along the floor, and after a few drinks and a few puffs, everybody got to work drawing on the walls like mad, and I had reams and reams of brilliant visual art from that party. It was a great success. Myself in the center, with hair and without. Down below, we have made-up characters except for the man in the right-hand corner saying "Zig Zig Mademoiselle," who was a very, very young Mark Caro, later on famous for his work in Delicatessen. Lovely, lovely party. I love Underground Heaven. It is one of my very favorite pieces. I've put in portraits of so many of the cartoonists that I loved. It was so much fun to draw, and it was a real push because it was an attempt to draw a metaphysical realm at a point when those kind of things weren't being done. I always wanted to be a portraitist. Well, we've got me and Dave Geyser, and we've got Robert Crumb, we've got Terry Richards, Ted Richards. The bottom panel there, we've got the inimicable S. Clay Wilson, Pat Moodian, who was an early pioneer in women's comics. The next page, close-up of Robert Crumb, a drawing I'm still very fond of. Dear Jim Osborne, who's not with us anymore. Me and Dave Geyser, who's gone on to be an artist in New York. I'm not sure what he's doing. Trina Robbins and Diane Newman. And then at some point, the drawing just fractures up into a very strange metaphysical creature. Basic story, just that everybody's at a party. Suddenly, there's a thing on the TV saying there's a nuclear alert. Everybody goes into a panic. What'll I do? What'll I do? And so each person goes into their own little private universe. There's Ron Turner in the left-hand corner. Jay Kinney looking above his spectacles and being a bit dubious, as Jay was wont to do. Bill Griffith, portrait there of his profile. And S. Clay Wilson again next to Gregor the monkey. In the next scene, we have the dreadful nuclear flash. It appears in a Church Street gay bar and continues on in a fractured way with a screaming Trina, and on to the next page with a lot of metaphysical frou-frou of one kind or another, and a little portrait of Maximilian Schell at the bottom there, just because I like his face. So we've still got Maximilian Schell in the left-hand corner there, but apparently some of the cartoonists are pupating, and some of them are turning into insects, and some of them are turning into poisonous fish. And Bill Griffith in a turtle shell talking to another turtle, and lo and behold, Victor Moscoso has turned into some kind of little beetle. And, is that a little profile of me? Well, I can't comment on that. And Trina Robbins is at the bottom, and she has become one of those talky baby dolls from the 1880s that just squeaked and rattled on and on and on. And here's lovely Jim Osborne as Dürer's self-portrait, the frustrated portrait artist in me, and the counterfeiter is at happy play here. We've got Greg Irons as a Japanese samurai. We've got Jay Kinney as St. George, killing the dragon. I like these three panels very much, and I might add very, very different from the usual underground comics work. As we see here, all hell has busted loose into a sort of a pop art, prototypical, slightly priapic universe of tumbling creatures and things. We've got a pair of twins with Bill Griffith's face, and not an awful lot of other people who are even distinguishable, but I just got into a pattern frenzy because I sort of do that and started to see things everywhere. But this kind of thing is very exciting for the brain to just kind of suddenly make semi-abstract yet distinct patterned objects out of nothing and just have them tumbling around. There isn't any real sense to this image. I just find it sort of visually mathematical blooming of sorts. It pleased me. Here we are in hell. And we've got flames, and we've got kinkajous, and we've got masks from Day of the Dead, and we've got Ronald Reagan in the center of things with Idi Amin there to the left. Basically, it was everything I could think of that might be roiling around in the flames. It's a wild and woolly ride full of cross-hatchings and madness, and all the little tiny cartoonists are right in the middle, being affected by the king of demons himself, Ronald Reagan. And here we have the denouement. I wake up from a terrible dream. My cat is terrified. I look to find my flatmate Rob, and he's wearing a gas mask, and actually reality turns out to be much more frightening than any dream could possibly be. The end. Public enemy. That was me. Me in the center, below our legal aid person. When I first came to England in 1984, one of the first things I got to experience was going to trial for obscenity. Knockabout Comics was being raided regularly by Margaret Thatcher's government, and on this occasion they had confiscated all copies of Frescozizi's. It had been for sale in a man's store whose name I cannot mention, but who is quite a massive entrepreneur, and his father was actually the judge at our trial, again, whose name I can't mention. And I've made light of it here. It appeared in Anarchy Comics, I think number 4. It was an upsetting experience to have to stand up and defend myself, and I had to think on the run, because I'd never been called into court over any of my American books. Public enemy. There was a little judge who had a little son who opened up a record store in London town. He carried comic books on a little wooden rack, and the vice squad popped the company who took a profit back. "No, I'll carry these." The little comic company got busted every year. The owners lived like garden gnomes, hiding out in fear. Their lady author came to court. The judge found her obscene. He read her comic front to back, behind a courtly screen. "What have you now to say, my dear, before I burn the lot?" The lady author looked around, then twitching, she stood up. "Define the word obscenity, Your Honor, for the court. Printed matter meant to turn our morals into sport. It took 10 years to live my book, based it on my strife. Rape victim, dancer, one-night stand, cartoonist, painter, wife. If my life seems obscene to you, it wasn't meant to be. I simply drew from what I knew, the men and women near to me. A typical assortment, rare and deviant beasts who hang around the clubs and bars, trading insults, pain, and yeasts. If truth is pornographic when depicted in the arts, don't blame the artist, blame the world. She's just observing facts." "Thank you for your testimony. I've listened carefully. I shall read your book again before I judge your plea." Her book was taken off the racks, all copies burned to grit. In Judgy's son's big record store, the men's sex books still sit. Lost Girls as a book is a bit of a freak, a bit of a strange animal. It's not a comic book. It's not fine art. It is drawing, but some say it's not even the pornography that we claim it to be. It's a strange animal that lives somewhere in the twilight zone. It took 16 years to draw, a lot of hard work every day. That was what I did for all those years. 20 monkeys with some crayons could have done it faster for sure, but every time I look at it, I'm very proud of it. Every line contains exactly the amount of color I wanted. Everything in it breathes properly when I hold it again. And I think it will probably take a long time before people can categorize it, because I believe it's in a category of its own. But I love it. And it was a huge, huge event in my life. These are 2 panels that didn't make it into the book for religious reasons. Part of the reason that it took me so long to illustrate Lost Girls was because of the layering techniques I used. I would lay out ink or watercolor in the background and then use 12 to 14 layers of colored pencils over the background to get a shimmering effect, and the shimmering effect would change with each layer and with each different color that I used. And sometimes I'd have to make charts so I could remember which colors I used, because they were just on instinct. And since color was an invisible character throughout the book, and I believe that color has a huge effect on people's emotions, it was very, very important that this be utilized absolutely, especially for skin tones. I listen to music always when I work, and that music affects me. And color is a music that you can use in silence, and if you use it effectively, it creates music in the mind's eye and ear. Every single moment that I used to do the book was important and added to it, and I think every moment of that labor was necessary to produce the kind of depth and the kind of emotion and the kind of humanity that I felt the book needed, so that it wasn't merely about sex, but it was about beingness and about humanness and about what it is to be alive and what it is to feel and what it is to be here on this physical plane and on the metaphysical plane and on the emotional plane and on the cosmic plane all at once. This is the first of a series of 11 drawings I did while working with an art teacher friend of mine in a halfway house in San Mateo, California, in the late 70s. And I would do a drawing, one for the person who was sitting for me and one for myself. This first one is of Jenny. She spoke to no one. All they knew about Jenny was that she'd had a very, very hard life. She ambled her way around the hospital with great difficulties. You can see she has a bandage around her leg. But there was certainly an eloquence to her bearing and her demeanor, and I thought she was quite beautiful in her own way. This is John. John had the mental age of probably about a 7-year-old. He was very sweet, and I found it very touching that he used to call me Mommy. This is Abby. Abby had been in a terrible sports accident. I think she'd been skiing. She'd been a very beautiful young lady. She still was very beautiful, but she had had such devastation done to her when she'd fallen that her nervous system was completely, pretty much effectively destroyed. And she had a sort of a low, keening cry that kept coming out of her. It was quite sobering to look into her big blue eyes and think of how her life must have been for her before she had this accident. This is David. David's a paraplegic. He worked very hard to be involved in the little art class, and he would come in every day with a little device strapped around his head, which had a rubber nipple at the end, which held a pencil so that he could fill in a grid with a tree or a swing or a house or a ball of sunlight. I became very fond of everyone there, but particularly of David, because his will was indomitable and his quiet struggle was huge for him. This is a picture of a man who was having his last days on earth. He gave his consent to let me draw him as he lay dying. Those little yellow marks at the bottom of his figure were actually the little shoes that they had on him. The drawing that I did for him, well, there was no one to give it to. He didn't have family, and he passed away before we'd left the halfway house that afternoon. This is Walter. Walter was worn down. He didn't know where he was anymore, and he wandered the hallways and looking confused, not knowing where he was. But he was a very sweet man. This is the janitor who stopped in his job to let me sketch him quickly before he moved on. Unlike everyone else, of course, he was fit and young enough to still enjoy life. This is Mazzaro. I found Mazzaro's situation particularly haunting. He was Japanese. His parents had raised him all of his life on their back porch. He was never allowed playmates. He never went to school. His family were very ashamed of him, partly because his tongue would stick out at odd angles and his body was out of his control. This is David again, lying in bed with the sponge between his knees. This is a schizophrenic man. He had nothing debilitating about his physical condition. He was perfectly healthy, but he was at times rather dangerous, and I wasn't allowed to sit alone with him and draw him. I had to have somebody there with us in case things didn't go well. And this is David again. He's sitting up in his wheelchair with his drawing equipment ready to go. I thought the world of David. This is Wesley, my very dear friend. We went clubbing a lot. Those were some of my happiest, danciest days, and Wesley was marvelous company. He used to wear lots of bracelets and dress beautifully. He was a grande dame in the most wonderful sense. This is Prosper, a lovely man who was originally from Zimbabwe. I worked on an underground comic with him that he advised me on. This I call Sneering Girl. It's a red-headed friend of mine from our comics ladies consciousness-raising group, which didn't turn out well. So much for feminism. This is called Kirk and T. Kirk was a former boyfriend, T, militant, lesbian, feminist, and both very irksome to me at one point, and I drew them together and then scribbled on them. This is from a series called Luna. It's about the sex drives lying deep within a woman's nature or my own nature. It's always been very important for my art not retain a particular style just because I've found it, but to constantly morph and change as my influences morph and change. This is another page from Luna. The most interesting thing about it is that it's kind of psychological female imagery. And I do think it has its own power and wildness, which I like. This is the first page of the Luna strip. Bottom drawing is an anatomical rendition of the inner ear. The phrase I wrote in it was, Luna was born in great anger. So what she is the psyche of a modern woman who is trapped in a female mask, a lie, pummeled by voices like pistols. She's hyper-aware of everything around her, and she's terrorized on a regular basis. She is victimized through her body, and she is held at bay from being completely herself. This is the second picture from that series. Again, very anatomical and yet kind of emotionally explosive. She's stuck within her own womb, sliding around, can't get out. She's lost in utterly familiar territory and cannot get out of the identity, the force field of being merely a woman. And that was very much my feeling during that period. When I first met Eduardo Paolozzi, when I came to England, he looked at that series and said, "Why aren't you famous?" Starting at the bottom of a figure, it's a self-portrait that I did still from that period, still from the late 70s, featuring my platform shoes and my feet, the chains being meant to represent the bondage I felt to the male species, to the problem of being female, and the kind of quality of being an unwilling geisha, which I felt I was caged by. This is the midriff of my self-portrait, more visual than anything else. For me, at that point, although I was writing my memoirs, I did not consider myself a writer. And so when I wasn't doing comics per se, these drawings were containing all the kind of cuneiforms and hieroglyphics of my femaleness and my psychological disarray and chaos. This is the top of that series, Fuck You, Buddy. It's got a lot of very tiny handwriting about bad feelings I had towards whatever partner I was with at the time. Fuck You, Buddy is done around the same time as Luna, again about the subject of feeling trapped. All the flowers and the obfuscating tendrils and things at the throat, which cover the throat chakra with beautiful femininity, the fur and feathers around the neck, the qualities of brassieres and lace. There's a little face with fur over it coming out from between the breasts. There's strange life inside there that's unacceptable and a little bit frightening. Undersea creatures, threatening-looking jellyfishes that are living on and inside the psychological body of the woman. Girlie, why are you hot to die? Okay, there was the object of my affection, a cartoonist who gave me no end of strife, but for 2 years of my life back in the late 70s, I was utterly obsessed with him. And the little picture at the top is of me, and the picture of the guy in shades is him. There's a cartoon character with a rifle at her breast, just where she's supposed to be softest. The 70s were a very strange time, like most times for women, because as there was a big move for personal freedom, well, I've got to say, for men, and women wanted freedom as well, but they didn't know how to express it and didn't know what freedoms they wanted because they'd never had it before. It's a bit like the employees of a monopoly suddenly finding they can set fire to a building, and instead of running free, they go back and they steal things and then get caught on the CCTV camera. So we got caught up and tripped over our own unexamined drives, confusion, and the danger we put ourselves into. The owl is actually a symbol of death in paintings from the Renaissance. The male character who's wearing sunglasses, he's got a bit of a bloody nose. In my mind, I'd punched him, but his eyes were hidden, his soul was hidden. I didn't know enemy from friend, and women were very alienated from each other, and they were cooperative in being used by men. It was a very strange melee to be involved with, where you couldn't depend on anyone or anything. While we were fighting for freedoms, we didn't know how to do it constructively, and we ended up as much victims as freedom fighters. Identiplate. This is my idea of an identikit image of the future. There were no such things as iris imprints. And I could see, or I could feel rather, that there was going to be more and more and more of that kind of personal invasion, where things would be known about us that were nobody else's business. I think that's why I put so many penises into it, and why I even put in that little streak at the bottom, which is meant to be scat or poo. The helpless face of the child who is caught in a terrible photo flash, during which they can extract the patterns of the iris. This little painting has been quite prophetic, really, I think. This I call Chiquita Rock and Roll. It's an amalgam of Carmen Miranda and Little Richard. I really find the patterns pleasing in that. This is an image that I did from an anti-nuclear newspaper called It's About Times, and it featured Ronald Reagan on the cover of it quite often. This is one of those images. Here we have Screaming Paul. This is Paul Mavridis, another cartoonist from that period, whom I at some point also obsessed over, but I very much like this drawing, and it got a fair amount of attention. This, I really haven't got a title for it. I suppose it's some kind of symbolic rape image, carefully drawn with a lot of scratching around the crotch. I put this in, although it's a comic, because it's also portraiture. On the top left-hand panel is an image of William Burroughs and S. Clay Wilson, and Wilson is turning into sort of a cyclops in the second panel and grabbing Burroughs by the neck. Then in the third image, Charles Bukowski, a.k.a. Hank Bukowski, another wild and woolly writer from that period, has entered the bar, and Wilson is telling him what he thinks of him. He was a huge fan of Burroughs, was very afraid of homosexuality at the same time, so he was more comfortable with Bukowski because Bukowski was, at least in his writings, an out-of-control womanizer. This is just an experiment with drawing animals. There's all kinds of textures in those. You can see it better if you experience some of the close-up textures. Some of them are quite beautiful. This group of animals was sensuous to draw. I love drawing hair and fur, the expressions on creatures. I love their noses. The buffalo has a really lovely textural quality to his coat, and I was very much in love with steel engravings and fine black and white drawings. I didn't have a repeatograph. They didn't come along till later, technical pens. So I used a dip pen for these, so that meant that every time you made a stroke, you had to dip the pen in the inkwell again. But it was wonderful. It was like petting the animal to draw them. The elephant seal and the red panda, probably some of these animals are extinct by now, but the elephant seal had such a beautiful satiny texture. It was like stroking his body with my pen, and even though it's made up of a lot of very tiny scratch marks, it still has that lovely, sleek, wet quality. I especially love his flippers. There's a little monkey at the top of the picture, which I love. The only made-up creature is the bat-winged demon character. He's sniffing poppies, and he was lots of fun as well, all his little scales and his little beard and all the kind of algae-like stuff on the top of his head. And this is a still life, again, with textures that I like very, very much. Self-portrait with tripes. This is a drawing I did after I came to the UK. I got involved with what was happening to the miners during that period. The more I looked into what was going on in England, the more utterly detestable Margaret Thatcher seemed to me, so I've drawn her as Kronos devouring her own children. The ideal husband. When I was a girl, I read Jane Eyre and was completely besotted with Mr. Rochester. I also loved the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, so this is kind of a sweet, wild and woolly portrait of my ideal man, complete with third eye. That eye stayed with me as an image. I played with the pen and ink and used a lot of mixed materials. I used watercolors, acrylics, black ink. You can see a lot of the detail in his hair, his mouth, and his nose, and all the color around his face. You feel utterly what it's made from. I always like to leave things a little bit unfinished and not finish the whole piece so you can see the suit he's wearing. Well, I haven't really bothered to do anything much but make a superficial wash around it because I want the total focus to be on his eyes and his mouth and his beard and his hair. I think it's a wonderful personal tulpa, a created entity which I'm still hypnotized by. Mermaid in a tub. I'd entered it into a contest, and of course it didn't even get an honorable mention. I think because the painting was so big, people were very alarmed at her face and at her big blue breasts. She was a kind of a premonition of the Lost Girls style. She's done completely in color crayons. Now, there may be some colored pencils in there mixed in together, yeah. I love the surprised, sexy, and alienated look on her face. I love the whole idea of a mermaid in a bathtub, and I really love using Fauvist colors. You know, color has always hypnotized me. This is the Lobster Woman of Toledo. You won't see any reason why I've done this, but I was stimulated by the classic painting Eleanor of Toledo, done by a very sedate portraitist, Il Bronzino. This looks nothing like that painting anyway, so there's no point in even referencing it except to show the kind of mad things that artists think about. the furry yet luminous textures in this image, the sensuous lips of the lobster mandrill creature and the surprised doll eye coming over the horizon, the weird satin on her sleeves was lots of fun, and the beadwork and the odd flowers and the pinched waist of her dress. Probably the only detail that's like Eleanor of Toledo, where the lovely delicate hands of Eleanor of Toledo is playing a tassel of pearls over her hand. And I was quite hurt when I took the picture in to be framed, and the man looked at it and said, "What the hell is this? Is this some kind of Salvador Dali crap?" Well, this is high-kicking Dolly, just another one of my doll portraits with a kind of a splash of color, a bit of mixed media. And this is the first color drawing done of Betty Page that I know of, because that was done in 1980, and that was turned into a calling card. This is a preliminary drawing for a painting called Pink Boy. The actual painting that I did is quite large. This is an A2-sized piece of paper. At that point, I was doing preliminary drawings for all my big paintings, which I do not do now. The girl standing is a sort of take on Blue Boy, but with a female body, which I found very interesting and enjoyable. There's the Virgin of Guadalupe behind her, glittering and glowing. The startling effect of Blue Boy having enormous breasts, I think it was quite a satisfying juxtaposition of images and also worked quite well. You can't help but miss the erotically charged body of Lurch and a very nicely drawn bottle in the background, which I was pleased with. Again, it was done with mixed medium. It was done with Dr. Martin's luminous inks, as well as pencil, color crayon, and acrylic paint. And this is naked self-portrait with a ray gun. There are some very nice textures in here when you look close up in some of the features in the face. And this is Spanking Betty, which was actually done in the UK when I was working with Skin 2 magazine, and I happened to be partners with a fella that couldn't get enough Betty Page drawings. And this is Self as Jungle, I suppose. Nice, satisfying textures going on when you examine it a little more closely. I like the idea of stark spaces near very full spaces. The adventurousness that I believe I showed in some of the colored turmoil in the backdrop, as opposed to the very precise bits in the front, images from undersea creatures, and a little margay in the middle of my forehead, the butterfly wings. I think of art as a kind of music. I've always thought of art as a kind of music, and indeed I've always listened to music. When I do my art, it helps me fill in the spaces, make the work vibrate, and have an all-over rhythm which encompasses all of the different things that I'm attempting in one image. There's some cartoon imagery to the side of my mouth. I love the undersea creatures. I thought about filling in some of the white bits and thought, no, I like their starkness because, again, they draw the eye back to the busier pieces, and I also feel it's very important for the eye to have an adventure when it enters my pictures, so that you have wild territory and you have peaceful areas, and then you have wild territory again. First painting I'm going to show you is one of my early self-portraits. I'm wearing a scarab necklace, which I bought from a pair of very attractive gay guys named Lee and Alex, who'd spent a brief time with Salvador Dali, and I'm holding an invisible cat on my shoulder whom I never got around to painting. I'm reminded by looking at this image of looking in the mirror after school when I was about 11. My hair was always really short, and thinking, if I'm lucky, I'll grow up to look like Marlon Brando. But the way chances go, I'll probably grow up looking like Rod Steiger. But there's like a tiny trace of mustache on that upper lip. Inside of me is a mean little man trying to get out. Zoran della Robbia, that was his name. Lovely little artist from someplace far away. Got a little crush on him when I visited France the first time and painted this very Egon Schiele-esque, a drawing of him which I ended up using as an invitation to an art show, minus the figure of myself enveloping him. I first showed you Pink Boy as a drawing in the illustration section, and this is the finished painting. I'm particularly interested in the textures on the Madonna, whom I quite loved. She's actually technically the Virgin of Guadalupe. And the features and the richness of the floor and the little florals in the room are quite fun, the little china dog. So I thought you might be interested in seeing how the finished painting looked. The preliminary drawing is really quite exact, and I used to do that quite a bit. Here we are at the entrance to Death's Drive-In. This is a painting dedicated to my dear flatmate, Rob, who was an armed robber and a very successful one for quite a few years until he got a bit lazy. He had a marvelous mop of platinum hair and looked pretty much exactly like he does in the painting, and I thought he needed a girlfriend who suited him just right. So I think they're quite happy together. Rob, where are you now? Moon Dance. This particular image is based on an earlier drawing from my comics period, which is entitled Portrait of a Rapist. Obviously, it would have had to have been drawn from memory. Even today, rapists don't like being caught on cell phones. Paradise Head. I came back from a miserable trip to France and just wanted to immerse myself in a warm yellow, pink, and orange sunset, where I could imagine birds lazily singing in the beaten copper sockets of my eyes, my head forever floating stationary in a sleepy lagoon. You are here, just like it says on the map. The hills of glorious Marin County in the sun, a lovely Japanese bridge from the tea garden, an English country cottage, a gypsy caravan, a little Tibetan palace of happiness with a beetle for a door. Up on the hill, a classic stone shack with a little surprised face, and a beautiful little Thai house with stained-glass windows, and an odd barber pole with silver lattice work. Down below, a snow globe that you can sit in, and a little spinney and a weeping willow tree. Trivia is based on the Roman word for 3 paths. At the top is an image of me from an old photograph. At the bottom, in golden clothes, is Tina, my friend from California, and next to her is Dido. Tina is very much a golden girl. Her mother named her Tiensen, which means golden heart, and she has a little happy hemp farm, and she's a very jolly little girl now. All around them are images from our lives. Tina loves tigers. Dido had a childhood doll. Her daughters are all depicted as little deer in a pool. And in the background next to me is a Golden Gate Bridge and a breed of flower that has special golden leaves. And in the very background is an ancestral tribute to the old ones based on thread paintings from South America. This was one of the first paintings that I did after I finished the book Lost Girls with Alan Moore. And I think you'll find if you look closely that you can see a kind of chicken foot-shaped pattern on the top image. I very much like texture on skin. I get very tired of just mixing up the colors with a little bit of shadow. Coming out by day on the bride green lawn. This was the painting I did after Alan and I got married, and the figure dancing with us is Lucia Joyce, who is buried in a local graveyard in Northampton. And I realized after I'd painted this that the three of us stand for three different kinds of art or three different kinds of learning, the kinetic, the visual, and the audio. And the story behind the fact that everybody's dancing in the graveyard, and I actually imagined that people were having a tea party there and women were wearing beautiful frilly dresses and big hats. It was a lovely day, and it is a beautiful graveyard. I've taken lots of pictures of it in the spring when the flowers are out, and there are little children's toys and things around the bottom of the picture, little fairies and pinwheels and things like that. I'm quite fond of this picture. I keep saying that, don't I? The conversation. Man and woman at odds, struggling as ever to understand each other and failing. He is using the powers of Hod as described in the Kabbalah, the power of language as exemplified by the bird-headed creature Thoth. She is emotionally reactive, and they hold up their symbols of each other and go at it. He looks away. She wants a fight. The fountain behind them is spewing bile. And what more can I say? A delicate balance. A little portrait of my quandary about marriage painted a few years ago, just before we tied the knot. The lion was my future husband in the picture, and to my right, his two leopard cub daughters. I am the little black house cat who is bravely pretending to be the ringmaster of my own fate. Red, green, amber. A personal version of Tara, the wheel, the cycle of reincarnation. It includes the worlds of illusion, cultism, self-obsession, the arts, the animal kingdom, and in the center, the Kellogg's rooster, king of the dung heap, Porky Pig, the undiscerning sensualist, and the snake energy in the form of the pound sign. Notice the Virgin logo on the blimp in its golden world of materialist splendor. And there's a couple of little fun things to this side. There's the Big Brother camera room with the all-seeing eye, and little George Bush at the bottom of the painting. He was still in office when I painted it. He's trying to get out the wrong door. If you'll notice at the top, there's a navy blue backgrounded one with an elderly gent in red bent over, Mr. Peter Stringfellow struggling along in his world of nightclubs. The next 6 oval portraits are characters Dorothy, Wendy, and Alice from The Wizard of Oz, Peter Pan, and Alice in Wonderland. The first image is of Wendy as a young girl with ivy in her hair. The second image is of Alice with her long golden hair. The third is of Dorothy with flowers in her hair. The fourth image is of Alice as a mature woman. The fifth is of Wendy in the dark with a pan figure walking past. And the last figure is Dorothy, the age she was in the book, with a pretty little shiny face. Flower Child is the title of this picture. I drew it this way because our lives are centipedal. We leave a trail of all our acts and states of awareness, which follow us everywhere to our last days. Infancy to enlightenment, I have placed little steps of awareness here, with a background of my home city, Golden Gate Bridge, Lombard Street, and Golden Gate Park and its tea garden. There's even a tiny little rat at the bottom playing with the infant child, and at the top is the point of enlightenment where the lucky human gets to turn into Tara, the ever-forgiving green goddess. The Magus. This is my husband. In his made-up rider's garb, I designed this nice outfit for him. He's standing in front of different bits of his living room. There's a drawing of his partially finished to one side, and a little statuette I gave him to another side. A couple of puppets that I brought him from Prague, a mask from Venice, a troll from Norway, an Egyptian statue from the museum, masks, bits of stars from his ceiling, and lovely little blue lines in his beard. I particularly like his eyes and his hands in this picture, because his eyes are like something out of a weird fairy tale, and his hands are exuding bright yarn-like lines of energy. She's the butterfly of the burlicue, the lovely stage dancer. This is a study in spectrum play, just a kind of a color study, but I also really like plump burlesque dancers, and the texture, I think, between her legs is particularly nice. This and the painting that follows it are based on a story I wrote for a magazine called Dodge 'em Logic that we were involved with. And it was about the fact that I used to go to strip clubs a lot. So I really like looking at women on stage in various costumes dancing around. I was the only woman at the time that was ever going to those clubs. It was me and a whole lot of men, and a woman standing shivering on stage going, "Oh, there's a lady in the audience. Would you like to ask a question? It's so nice to see you here." The Three Graces. Carrying on from Butterfly of the Burlicue, another textural study of just the beauty of neon light and feathers and shiny costumes and high heels and beautiful satiny hair. What a gorgeous image. It's so ancient, it's so hypnotic, it's so lovely. Et in Arcata Ego. This painting was triggered by two things. First, the fact that my bike was stolen, and second, the memory of the night I was attacked and threatened with murder in the middle of a nasty, mushy waste ground when I was just 18. I imagined that an angel surrounded by blue flames had saved my life, and in the painting she has placed me on a bicycle and we escape the man waving a plank who is covered in red fire. It was a terrible night, but as you can see, I had a magic bicycle, and the angel was marvelous. And it happened in a town called Arcata. Contemplating Apocalypse. The lovely, quiet, placid Japanese geisha gazing out the window at a gigantic Mothra heading straight for her lovely paper-covered house. She has a wonderfully scary dog accompanying her with fangs. He is one of the nicest things about the painting. And her body is covered with mysterious scroll work. The Japanese response to their tsunami disasters bespeaks an extraordinary culture of mysterious self-control. I began this painting before Japan was devastated. I tend to think it captures the otherworldly calm manifested in a people who quietly organized to care for each other in the literal eye of a perpetual storm of increasing complexity and consequences. Las Mujeres means the mothers in Spanish. This is a very typical group of images on the outside of buildings all over the Mission District in San Francisco. Beautiful goddesses of the sea, mothers with their head wraps and colorful earrings, snakes and yucca plants. It's all very tropical and incredibly colorful and beautifully patterned. These murals are just not to be believed, and they're everywhere in the Mission District. And that's where most of the cartoonists all lived. Now, there are people in the windows and who look like they're standing outside the windows in the painting as well. They're groups of my friends that I went dancing with and that I grew up with and that I drew with and drank with, went wild with, and enjoyed costume parties with. It's a celebration of my life in San Francisco and the warmth of the Mission District. Here we have the kindly ones. The original painting of this was done just after my mother died when I was 23, and it was burnt in a warehouse by a group of cultists. And for many years, I missed the painting. I should tell you which person my mother is. She's the one in the crazy hat with the mismatched boob embroidery, and she and her friends are sitting in a place called the Tonga Room, which was one of the many tiki bars that were popular in the 50s and the 60s. I, as a child of 8 or so, have just walked into the room, and they're looking at me as if to say, "Get the hell out of here, kid." I love the Coit Tower in the background, very phallic, a real thing. It was contributed by Mrs. Coit to her favorite group of men, the volunteer firemen of San Francisco, and that yellow building sits on top of a hill to this day. It may not be yellow, but artistic license. I call this the tutelary deity of abortion. The Tibetan Buddhists believe that when you die, you go to a windowless room made of iron, and there you meet your tutelary demon, the representative of the dark in yourself that you didn't address or take care of while you were alive. And there you meet your tutelary demon, which dances before you. And if you haven't prepared for that event and that tutelary demon, then perhaps that small, minute agglomeration of the white drop and the red drop, which is the representative of you, which is carried through the underworld and back into life again, may not survive. So the whole point of a tutelary demon is that you know it while you're alive. You face it, you understand it, and you receive its teachings. And although they have very ferocious faces, they're not meant to be frightening. They are meant to help you relax and be calm when you see the ferocity of the things you have not taken care of properly.
You can't tie her down. She's a monster from the feminist lagoon, returning for a second bout, and this time it's personal. She's a giant whore of roads. See her draw angry men, drunken women, thrill to her demons, shiver at her gorgons. It's all there, in black and white and pink and green and blue and red all over. Squid women, cycloptic drunks, mermaids in a bathtub, screaming skulls, bald-faced brats, homunculi on parade. And it's all from the terrible and original mind of one crazy dame, mad, sad, bad girl, the one and only, the shocking, mocking, ever-changing, never self-plagiarizing, one and only Melinda Gebbie. Check her out. Look at her comics, her drawings, and her paintings on Bad Girl, Sad Girl, Mad Girl, Art of Melinda Gebbie.